All right, we might get underway. I can see everybody's here now from our end.
Yep, sorry about that.
Thank you everybody for coming along tonight. I'd like to start off by acknowledging the traditional owners of the land that we're meeting on today. I recognise I'm hosting this webinar from the country of the Paraquat people, but I also recognise that traditional owners of the countries where you all join from today, we pay our respect to all elders past and present and celebrate the diversity of our country. This evening, we're joining to talk about the Paraquat and Diquat APVMA chemical review process, talk about submissions, hear from the APVMA themselves about their review processes and what is involved from their end, so we can get an insight into exactly what is covered by the chemical review process, and also get some insight from Grain Producers Australia representatives in terms of impact on farming communities and what individual farmers and groups can contribute to the conversation to be able to fuel their submissions and also inform GPA's submissions or that of other grower groups. So tonight I'm just going to do a quick spiel about Grain Producers Australia for those who don't know about what GPA does and who we're made up of. Then I'll be followed by GPA Southern Region Director Andrew Wiedemann. He'll give us a bit of an issue analysis and grower perspective. APVMA Director of Chemical Review, Gai Weller, and APVMA Director of Environment, Janine Knight, will also join us. Gai is going to give an overview from the review process within the APVMA and how that works at their end. Gai and Janine will be able to help with any questions at the end. And then GPA Interim Chief Executive Pete Arkell will give submission considerations, insight into what sort of information is relevant and will actually help inform the process. We'll offer some Q&A at the end, so please feel free to enter something through and we'll go from there. Grain Producers Australia represents the interests of around 22,500 grain producers who grow broadacre, grain, pulse, oilseed crops throughout Australia, contributing to the economic strength of the entire country with an industry that's valued at around $13 billion. GPA advocates national policy outcomes with benefits for grain producers. As a not-for-profit company limited by guarantee, GPA is governed by a board that's elected by producer members representing major grain producing regions. GPA's membership comprises direct producer members of the grain councils of our various state farming organisations. The elected leaders of these groups, backed by their staff, represent members' interests by the GPA Policy Council. GPA itself, its robust representative process through the Policy Council and through the directors help provide a strong and independent national advocacy voice for grain producers based on a transparent process that's developed through these policy councils and committees. We engage with all sectors of the grains community to ensure the operation of the most efficient and profitable supply chain. We also facilitate a strategic approach to research, development and extension intended to deliver sound commercial outcomes from industry research. We also have responsibilities in terms of representing Australia's levy-paying grain producers that are legitimised under federal legislation. This includes managing biosecurity for the Australian grains industry through Plant Health Australia. We're a signatory to the Emergency Plant Pest Response Feed. We're also a joint representative organisation responsible for overseeing the Grains Research and Development Corporation's performance, strategic investment, with matching federal government funding in RD&E activities. This comes underneath the PIRD Act. We also manage the risk of chemical residues and environmental contaminants in grain products to help facilitate domestic and export market access. This comes under the National Residue Survey. We also perform a role through representing our industry and looking after pesticide and chemical processes. Sorry, I've just had a child. I think we might liken that to one that we've seen on TV during COVID, even though those children have been told to stay out. Anywho, I'll pass on to Andrew Wiedemann now,
Yep.
and he can speak from an industry overview and grower perspective. Andrew, please feel free
Yeah,
to.
great. Look, thanks, Rachel. Great introduction, and yeah, really quite pleased that the team have been able to pull this together tonight to just be available also this to a number of farmers that are out there. I know we've got some of our members baling hay tonight and working, trying to beat weather patterns. Obviously, we're all facing a changing weather pattern environment at the moment. So the reality of life is that at least this can be viewed down the track and as a resource for our members and farmers generally right across Australia who have a very keen interest, obviously, in the continued use of Paraquat Diquat. I think most of you have probably seen quite a number of the public statements that we've made, but a lot of what has been stated in the public doesn't really fall into the regime of what the regulator's looking for. And it's just fantastic tonight to have Gay and Janine on the call here tonight as well, along with Peter and Rachel in the office to try and help and guide people as to how they can submit, put their passion forward in terms of how they see the usage in their own situations on their own farms and what it means to them. I think all of us realise quite clearly that it's a cornerstone and a building block of conservation agriculture for Australian farmers in general. And we need to try and continue to maintain these tools when we don't have any other options. But we also have to be aware that we're working in an environment and in changing environment as we see it at the moment, and how we can then provide information, which I'm sure Peter will touch on in terms of the data that is clearly what our regulator needs in this situation, but also that data that farmers themselves have. We've been able to form up some great partnerships over the last couple of months with various players in the industry, which I'm sure Peter will touch on as well. And I really feel that, tonight our Chemicals Committee at Grain Producers Australia has representation from right around Australia, as Rachel's indicated, and all of us have our own networks of farmers who are all looking towards us for leadership in this process. And that's what tonight's about, is about providing information that you can help us with as we try and make sure that all the tools are available to everyone. So look, I'm looking forward to the questions more, Rachel. So I might hand back to you, and yeah, quite keen to answer any questions that might come up through the night where they fit into to our understanding. And it's just great also, I should mention that GRDC, Grains Research Development Corporation, have also been fundamental building block in the background of trying to help work through this and help the industry with data. So I don't want to be remiss in just ensuring that people are aware, what a wonderful organisation we have in that in the GRDC to help us. So look, I'll hand back to you. Thanks, Rachel. You're on mute there, Rachel.
Thank you. Apologies for the noise in the background. Things are going swimmingly over here. Would like to invite Gay Weller to speak and represent. We've got a presentation here that I'll work through with you, Gay. Feel free to.
I think I'm off mute.
There you are.
Okay, right. Okay, thank you very much. And good evening. My name is Gay Weller and I'm the Director of Chemical Review at the APVMA. And thank you for the invitation to address the meeting tonight. Now, in my role as Director of Chemical Review, I work closely with the various scientific assessment areas within the APVMA to reconsider registrations and ensure that products in the market remain safe and meet contemporary standards. We also have Janine Knight with us tonight. Janine is our Director of Environment. If we could go to the next slide, please. I think we can skip this one. We've already had an acknowledgement of country, so we can go straight. Now, I think the important thing is to remember the purpose of the APVMA. The purpose of the APVMA is to regulate agricultural and veterinary chemicals, which are used to manage pests and diseases for the Australian community and protect Australia's trade and the health and safety of people, the animals and environment. So when we look at a chemical, we only look at that particular chemical and its role in the health and safety aspects. We could go to the next slide, please. So when we look at what we have to consider in assessing products, we break it down into our statutory criteria. So that's what we have to look at under our legislation. And that's broken down into safety, efficacy, and trade. And that the labelling ensures that when the product is used, it is safe and efficacious and won't unduly impact trade between Australia and other countries. When we do our assessments, we break that down into various aspects, and they build in to build the aspects of safety, efficacy, and trade. So we do a chemistry assessment, toxicology assessments, residues and trade are linked together. They're actually done in the same group. Worker safety and bystander exposure, the environment, and we also look at efficacy and target crop safety. We can go to the next slide now. So registered chemical products are required to meet the current safety, efficacy, and trade and labelling criteria. And that's in a contemporary way. So we may conduct a review if new information indicates that a product no longer meets these criteria. And that's when we actually start a review, when we actually have concerns that we're no longer meeting those legislated criteria. We'll go to the next slide now. So the chemical review process is, I've broken it up into 3 bits here. The assessment bit is actually the major part. When we start an assessment, we call for information. So we go out to the holders, the registrants, and we also go out to the public at the start of a chemical review. And we ask for information. We do what we call a data call-in. We also look at data coming in from other places, and I'll go into where we get all the other information from later on. We assess that information, and then we look at whether or not it's going to be safe and efficacious to use, or whether we can vary the product, vary the label, put mitigation in place so that it will meet the statutory criteria when used according to the label directions. Then we go to a proposed decision. So this has all been in-house at the APVMA. We then go to a proposed decision, right? We publish that and we go to public consultation. Now that public consultation is where we're at the moment with Paraquat and Diquat, and that's the opportunity of people to look at how we made our proposed decision and whether or not they think we've looked at all the data that's available out there. There's a strict 3-month period to get those public consultation submissions in, and we'll go into that later. But once we get all those submissions in, we consider those submissions and whether or not they will impact on the decision that we have proposed to make. And then we'll go to our final decision, which is an affirmation, as in there's nothing to change, or there's a variation, and where we'll issue new labels and there will be new use patterns phased in, or we go to cancellation. And then we do a phase out period, which is where the product can be used according to the product that's on the, with the uses that are on the label, and then they get moved out. With the, it's all right, you can go to the next one now. Okay, so the assessment is broken basically into, I'm just skipping ahead here. Okay, so once again, I'm going to point out that this is a contemporary assessment. Okay, so in the past, these products like Paraquat were originally registered a very long time ago, and assessment methodology has moved on quite a bit since then. And certainly, I think we're starting to notice that in the outcomes. So we begin with a hazard assessment, which defines the critical issues related to the product and defines certain limits. Most of the information used in hazard assessments come from model species. So if we're thinking about the endpoints used in a human assessment, a lot of that data comes from things like the model species such as rats, mice, dogs, and rabbits, right? And we use that information and we set values based on body weight. So the amount of active per body weight that is not deleterious to your health to be exposed to. So that's how we set a maximum daily exposure. And that could be for an acute exposure or for a chronic exposure. So acute, one feed, or chronic, a small amount over a long period of time. It also sets things like your average daily intake allowance. So this approach is of using representative species is fairly common, and it also goes into the environment assessment, and we may have to touch on that again later on. We can go to the next slide now. So the data that we've considered in going to our proposed decision is the information that we received from the holders and other stakeholders when we did that initial call-in of data. We also use all the data that's held by the APVMA. So that's data that we've had where people have put in submissions for registration, for variations, all that sort of stuff that's no longer subject to what we would call limits of use or any form of data protection. We also do literature searches, so we're looking at information in the public domain, and then at various times during an assessment, we may go out and seek specific information. And that could be about how products are used. It could be chemistry information about certain metabolites, that sort of thing. So we can move on now. So if you look at the Paraquat and Diquat, the review timeline, I'm not going to go back and tell you that the review was commenced more than 17 years ago, but we'll go from where we are in recent times. Okay, so the proposed decision was published on the 30th of July this year. We're currently in the 3-month consultation period, and that closes on the 29th of October. Now, it's very important that we receive any submissions by the 29th of October because we don't actually have the capacity to extend that time frame. We can go back and ask further questions regarding submissions, but if we haven't got a submission, we won't be able to, by the 29th, we won't be able to look at it. So when we get all the submissions in, we consider those submissions and we assess any information that's come in with that and whether or not that's going to vary the current findings. At the moment, we expect to make the final decision in late February, but depending on how much information comes in and the level of assessments that are required, that could be extended past that date. Next slide, please. So after we make our final decision, it's not the end per se at that point. We actually have proposed a 2-year phase-out period for stock bearing the previous label. That phase-out period commences when we make the final decision, which may be a couple of days before we actually publish the decision in the Gazette. So it actually starts when we make the final decision. New stock entering the market will bear the new label. And it's a reminder that products should always be used in accordance with the label that is on the container that you have. When it comes to MRLs, so that's your maximum residue limits, they won't be updated immediately as an outcome of the review. They won't be updated until we've had the 2-year phase-out period and sufficient period has passed to ensure that we won't be exceeding MRLs from product that was used according to any label use. The next slide, please. So what sort of submissions can we consider? And this is probably really what you wanted to get to. So submissions coming into the APVMA should really, well, they need to address the specific areas of the review technical report. Okay, and this relates back to those statutory criteria that we must consider. So they have to go back to how we assess the safety, the efficacy, or the trade criteria. So when we're talking safety, you've got the toxicology, which underpins the health assessment for worker exposure and for bystander exposure, and also for safety to the environment and through residues in food. So if I want to give you a couple of examples of the things that we could actually consider, things like addressing the assumptions we made in modelling scenarios. So one of those could be the amount of product used by a single user in a day. And what we look at there is a reasonable worst case scenario. And we've come to a conclusion of where we sit with that based on a standard working day, the size of a boom, and a couple of other factors that come in to how products might be used in the field. We also, another example would be providing information to refine the modelling. Scientific surveys of species present in crops which would need to address multiple geographic and climatic situations. So it's not just what happens in a field in one state. We have to think about the surveys of the species present in WA, South Australia, Victoria, New South Wales and Queensland, because these labels are very broad. They go across all states. Maybe not Northern Territory or Tasmania, but in general, that's where they're going to be used. The other point that we'll make is that you could provide information to refine the use pattern. And that's sort of falling off the bottom of the page here. But that's information to define an application window. So how early in the season something is used, and it's only used for this very short window of time. I think in general, we've pretty much covered that. But if there is an opportunity there, I'm sure that you'll look at that. The other thing that has come up, and I know that you guys, that the GPA have been looking at this, is something like the percentage of area treated when using optical spot spray. So when we assess, do a chemical review, we assess what is actually on the label. And the label currently says that the percentage of area is up to 30%. So we're coverage of weeds. So we're actually assessing it at 30% coverage. So that's just a possibility of things you can look at. Next slide, please. So the information which does not address the statutory criteria of safety, efficacy, and trade are statements like whether or not there are any alternative products, or if a chemical is cheaper compared with alternatives, or the impact on current agricultural practices, or the use of application rates that are not currently on the product label, and things like hearsay of what species may be present in a field. Those sorts of things don't actually provide us with information that we can actually use against the, to vary our current assessment of safety, efficacy, and trade. Next slide, please. That's it. So at the moment, we do have the public consultation open. The details of how to submit a submission are on our website under public consultation on the APVMA website. If you have any questions, please feel free to drop us an email at chemicalreview@apvma.gov.au, or if you phone that number, one of the chemical review team will pick it up and should be able to help you. Okay, I think that might be it.
Thank you very much, Gay. I'm almost scared to speak because I have another child pop in, so I'm going to throw to Pete. Pete is the GPA Interim Chief Executive, and he can have a chat to you all now. I'll move to the next slide. You just let me know when you're ready, Pete.
Yeah, thanks, Rachel, and a big thanks to Gay and Janine for joining us this evening. It was a really good overview, Gay, so thank you for setting the scene there. So yeah, I guess I was hoping to bring it back to what we can do as an industry and what you can do as individual growers in the next 4 weeks or so to really put forward information to the APVMA to help them in finding a path forward and in finalising these really important reviews for agriculture. So Gay's obviously touched on the statutory criteria, and I won't recover that, but yeah, it's important to think that information we put forward as GPA or other industry groups really does need to address those core statutory criteria the APVMA need to satisfy itself around. And in the case of Paraquat and Diquat, the preliminary decision finds that around 20% of registered use patterns can be supported across Paraquat and Diquat products currently in the market, and around 80% of those use patterns aren't supported based on the information before the APVMA. So this certainly raises some challenges for the grains industry, but I can see a number of participants on the call from different industries, and certainly these proposals are challenging for a large number of sectors of Australian agriculture. So Rach, if you move to the next slide, this just provides a really high-level view of where the preliminary review decisions have landed for key grains uses. And I guess there's 3 critical uses I'll touch on here. Obviously, the use of Paraquat in fallow through broadcast sprayers is a really important piece of resistance management on many grain farms as the alternate mode of action to glyphosate in that pre-planting scenario. So for those fallow use patterns, what's proposed is that in most cases those uses will be supported, but at significantly lower application rates. And those lower rates are driven by concerns around possible risks to small birds predominantly, and to a lesser extent, risks to small mammals. Gay's touched on the optical spot spraying technology, and look, there's many hundreds of these units now in operation on Australian farms, particularly in our northern cropping systems, where these tools are critical in those fallow situations. As things currently stand in the draft preliminary decisions, those use patterns won't be supported. So it's proposed that Paraquat won't be able to be used through camera sprayers if these decisions land where they currently are. And once again, that's driven by concerns over risks to small birds and to a lesser extent to small mammals. And Gay's touched on some of the assumptions there around 30% paddock treated, and the rates on these labels for optical spot sprayers are substantially higher than broadcast rates. So that obviously drives some of those concerns around birds and mammals. The third use pattern, which is also a really important one, particularly for pulse producers, are those late use patterns for Paraquat and or Diquat around harvest aid, as a harvest aid, a desiccant or potentially spray topping for late weed control. And once again, there is support for these use patterns, but at substantially reduced rates again. And interestingly, for those in-crop uses, it does seem to be possible risks to small mammals that are driving a lot of those restrictions on proposed rates. And Gay's touched on the fact the APVMA, has to look at the practical worst case scenario based on current labels. That makes sense. They would look at that. So, Rach, if we just go to the next slide. Andrew's touched on the collaboration with GRDC and with grain growers around this. We really got our heads together very quickly after those draft reports emerged and really sort of set about putting in place a plan to really respond to the APVMA in the best and most comprehensive way we could in the 3 months we've got. So, in essence, for the bird and mammal risk assessments, what's reflected in the technical documents is really a tier 1 assessment. And Janine might be able to expand on this in some of the questions, but that initial tier 1 assessment does sort of look at very conservative exposure assumptions. Look, fairly simple modelling and fairly general modelling, and it looks at sort of focal species more so than particular individual species that might be there on Australian grain farms. And that tier 1 assessment has obviously led to these proposals. So the work we've been doing, and it's great to see Chris Lee Steer on the call tonight. We've been working with Chris, who's an expert in this field, to look at what we can pull together to really understand more realistic assumptions around how these products are used on Australian farms, and also looking at Australian species that might be found on grain farms. And we're hopeful that'll allow a refinement of the risk assessments to provide a more practical reflection of use patterns and risks on Australian farms. So, look, that work's progressing well. It is really detailed work, but that's certainly our hope, that looking at the more particular use patterns and actual Australian species that potentially we may be able to find a more practical way forward that will allow more of these tools to be retained for grain producers. So, Rach, if we go to the next slide there, this once again just sort of reiterates what the APVMA can consider in their finalisation of the proposals. So obviously scientific information, critiques of information that has been used or other information that should be brought to the attention of the APVMA, information that does help around looking at the assumptions in some of those risk assessments, and that's really at the core of a lot of what GPA is very focused on. And Gay's touched on the kinds of things that are out of scope, which are generally more issues relating to the commercial or financial impacts at a farm level, at a regional level, at a sector level. And the 29th of October is the big day, so there's a lot of people focused fairly hard on putting the best submissions together we can. And we have heard a lot from growers that growers are wanting to have their say on these issues. These tools are very important to production. So the next slide really just picks up how growers and industry groups can pull together and assist our efforts for the grains industry to put forward the best information we can for the APVMA to consider. And I guess there's five key points I'd like to call out here. Please do reach out to your GPA regional directors. So obviously Andrew in the south, Brendan in the north, and Duncan Young in Western Australia, or indeed our GPA state members. So they're all on the GPA website, and many are on the call tonight. So do provide your input, have your say. It all helps build that picture. The second point's a really important one, and we are looking for for primary evidence around how these products are used on grain farms to integrate into our submission to put forward to the APVMA to help them refine some of the assumptions that are feeding into their assessments of how these products are being used. And a particular area we're interested in is around spot sprayer records. So the actual records from these systems, whether they're a John Deere See and Spray system or a Croplands Weed It system or a Weed Seeker system. A lot of these machines do keep pretty detailed records around how much product is applied in the paddock, the percentage treated per hectare, which is really important because we've heard, as Gay said, the assumption is 30%, but we're hearing from growers that averages are closer to 5 to 10%, and that difference, does make an important difference when you're looking to assess risks here. So if you have one of those systems, we'd really ask that you do consider sharing 6 of your last spray records through to grain producers to help us feed into our submission. We'll obviously look to aggregate that information and de-identify those records, but look, we think having that primary evidence from the machines and the systems themselves will give us a good evidence base to have a discussion on optical spot sprays going forward. The third point is there are a number of industry surveys that have been going on that have got some great responses. So thank you if you've fed into the Grain Producers South Australia survey or New South Wales Farmers or AgForce. I think we've really been overwhelmed by the response and the quality of input we've had there. And grain growers do have an active survey that remains open. So that one closes on the 30th of September. So only a few days to go. So please do jump on the Grain Growers website there or their social pages, and you'll find a link to that survey. And once again, all that information really helps us build a picture to really put forward a strong stance as an industry. Point 4 talks about putting in a submission yourself, and that's a great thing about Australia. It's a free country where everyone can have a say. So look, do think about that. And the kinds of things that would be useful to put forward are really sort of how you use these products in your farming business. Things like the use timing, the rates you're using, and so on, the percentage treated for those camera sprayers. That specific information is really useful in helping to refine those risk assessments. Do also have a think about any information you might be aware of around bird or wildlife surveys on your farms or in your farming landscapes. It's really surprising how much of this information is out there from land care groups or farming organisations or bird watchers, whatever it might be. There's some really good insights around what species are found in different parts of the farming landscape, and importantly in this context, either in those fallow situations or in crop environments for some of those later use patterns. So look, any wildlife surveys, bird surveys would all be very helpful. So please do flick those through to both grain producers and also do think about putting in a submission yourself for the APVMA to think about. The final point, I guess, goes to the wider discussion. So look, Andrew Barry Large, our chair, and myself met with the Agriculture Minister in Canberra a number of weeks back, and Paraquat and Diquat was high on that agenda. So look, GPA has been very, very forthright in saying the APVMA is a science-based independent regulator here. They need to be given the space to independently reach their conclusions, and I'm sure that'll happen. So we said to the Minister, we don't need any more ministerial directives here or directions. What we need is for the APVMA to be given the time it needs to really comprehensively assess the information the authority will receive through this process, and to use that information to reach the right science-based decisions. So that's the message we're getting across. And look, yeah, if you're talking to your own local members of parliament, do share what this means to your business, because it's really important they hear it, both in Canberra, but equally in the electorate. And there's a wider discussion, I think, that really is happening, with Scott Hanson's leadership of the APVMA and Catherine as the new chair. I think there's an openness to think about how we can reform the ag chemical regulatory system in a broader sense going forward, beyond Paraquat and Diquat, and things like whether Australia needs a more defined benefits test as part of that regulatory framework. I think has to be an active discussion. Whilst the APVMA doesn't have it in their remit now, there's got to be discussion around whether we need to think about that going forward, at least in terms of how hard we try and explore possible mitigations for those key products and use patterns where we simply don't have alternatives available. So, Rach, they were my contributions for tonight. Thanks again for Gay and Janine joining us, and for everyone from joining in from around Australia. It's an important discussion, and look forward to some questions.
We've got some questions that have come through, so please feel free to pop your thoughts in there. And if we can't get to them tonight, we'll make sure to follow up with you guys as well. The first one on the list here, utilising camera and optical sprayers radically reduces the total volume of active used in paddocks on a net per hectare basis. Subsequently, it radically reduces environmental and biodiversity impacts. Why have those use patterns at adequate efficacy rates not been proposed for future labels? Again, Janine, that probably comes under your remit.
Okay, so if we look at that particular optical spray on the label, it's actually at 3 times the rate of the standard rate in what's being applied over 30% of the area. So it's actually a fairly high rate at the moment when you calculate it out to 30% of the area. So what we do is we assess what is actually on the label, and we will look at subsets of what's on the label. But at the moment, as far as efficacy is concerned, we actually have to assume that the optical spot sprayer needs it at 3 times the rate of the broadacre spray. And therefore, that would be a variation coming in perhaps after the review to actually provide information to support a lower application rate in the optical spot sprayer. Does that make sense?
Yeah, this really comes back to what we're seeking information about, doesn't it, Pete? The fact that we can then inform practices on the ground, Gay?
Yeah, you know, that would actually need a data package to support that lower rate, or an argument of some description that says that with the way the machine works and how it's actually applied, that the standard rate on just this at the spot is sufficient and not 3 times the rate which is currently being put there.
I think if I might just jump in, Rachel, just topping up what Peter was talking about before, and in regards to that question in particular, it's paramount the work we're doing behind the scenes with some of the major manufacturers like Deere, Crop Care, and others that are around there, trying to build that evidence base. In a lot of circumstances, these products are actually only running at 5 and 6% of what we've found from some of the information, Gay. So we're looking to obviously compile that. It's never been done before, so clearly this will be ongoing work. But I think we've set the building blocks in place to pull that information together in a usable format. And it is, as I think Pete's also alluded, one of the reviewing the regulator going forward, not associated with this particular topic, but just helping to modernise, I suppose, what's going on in automation and AI technology at the moment has probably missed a lot of the labels because we just don't have a lot of that data. So I think this is really important, not only for just Paraquat, Diquat, but for other products that are also grouping up in behind. So I think it's really important, and that's a great question, and it's one our chemicals committee is obviously very focused on as well, in terms of helping and supporting growers to get that information back through their various means. Thanks, Rach.
Thanks, Andrew. There's a couple of questions here which sort of all relate to the environmental data that has been used under the review, and questioning the location at which the research was done and whether this has an Australian context to it or an overseas context to it. I think part of the information that we're suggesting people submit, and also what GPA will be putting forward, relates to trying to give an Australian context to that data. Pete, are you able to elaborate a bit more on this concept?
I can. Janine, did you want to, or Gay, would you like to sort of explain the EFSA model and sort of how that feeds into the APVMA's assessments?
Yeah, I think I might jump in because the assessment is not based on any field data. It's actually based on laboratory data, and all of the international assessments, like overseas, we all are basing our assessments on the same data set, which are toxicity tests performed on standard test species. So we have the passerine birds tested, and bobwhite quail and mallard duck, and so we have a suite of standard test species that we use in the laboratory. So those are fed into the model. So it wouldn't be accurate to say that we're relying on overseas data. Rather, it's laboratory data that's being used to inform our assessments. And same for the human health assessment.
Yeah, that's really helpful. Thank you, Janine. I guess the build there really comes down to this exposure element of the relationship that Gay touched on. So I think we're really interested in any information around but as I've mentioned, mammal and bird surveys on grain farms, just so they can better understand what species might be around, whether they're herbivores or omnivores, and so I think all that information can help feed into that risk assessment, and hopefully Janine helps to refine it further if possible.
I might clarify that a little bit as well, because the assessment, it doesn't actually refer to any specific species. We refer to a generic species. So we're assessing, we assume that there'll be some herbivory of weeds in the treatment area. We assume that there are insectivores feeding on insects in the treatment area. Also weed seeds, for example, or animals feeding on seeds within the treatment area. So we try to keep the assessment as generic as we can, so that it can be applied across the nation. But when we can't be satisfied with that, that's where we could use additional information that's relevant to the crop. I mean, we did refine the assessment in some cases where we do consider the timing of application. So, for example, when it's desiccation, we assume that there is interception by the crop for some species, but also there might be more potential for mammal species in that case, because there's more coverage so we expect they're more likely to be mammalian species, for example, when there's full coverage than when there is bare ground. So I think to refine the assessment, to get the more bang for the buck, you really want to focus on the exposure aspect of that assessment, which I think you touched on, Pete, where we want to add more realism in that sense, where you can do literature searches as well, which might inform that in terms of specific crop situations. But it's really exciting to hear that there's some work going on in terms of surveys as well. I look really forward to seeing what information you've got for that. I think also another I think another thing I would recommend is for very specific scenarios or crop situations that are of great importance to you, just go back into the guidance document where you can drill down to see what your assumptions are underlying that particular scenario. For example, for say a fallow situation, we're assuming that its application to bare soil, and you're going to get a limited suite of species there, like a small omnivorous animal such as a mouse. I know we have many native mice, but they have patchy distributions. But it would be really good if we could have maybe some information on the occurrence of any non-target mammals on site. But we also would assume maybe a granivorous bird such as a finch feeding on weed seeds, or an omnivorous bird such as a lark feeding on worms and seeds, or an insectivorous wagtail, for example. I think that would be really helpful to just get more information about the occurrence of what sort of species you see in Australian crops. We'd also really like to see multiple sites as well, because we really want to get some coverage on you know, the natural variation we have across different areas, and you know, I guess climatic areas as well. Yeah. Thank you.
Really insightful and gave us quite a few cover points from the question list. There's one that was posted fairly early on, and it would be interesting to see whether it does fall under consideration for the APVMA. Would the APVMA consider any statements pertaining to trade implications of lessened sustainability and carbon capture on the back of the removal of paraquat from the system?
I don't think that would be within our remit with that aspect of trade. For us, it's trade to do with residues resulting from the use of a product. So it's actually to do with the use of the product rather than a change to use pattern because we're not using the product.
No worries. There's a question. We've obviously got other industries within the participant group here, and there's one that's relating to horticulture, just questioning around perennial horticulture applications. Is there an insight there that you can give around the decisions that were made, or am I asking out of school because we've given you a grains query?
Janine, do you have anything with regards to orchards or grapevines?
Sorry to put you on the spot there.
Sorry, is that with respect to the scenario? I
can see that that's the bottom question on the list there.
Okay. I think it's just because the we actually have a different, we assume a different types of species that occur in orchards and vineyards. Is it orchards and vineyards that we're talking about?
I'm assuming so, yes.
Yes.
Yeah. Well, yeah, we have different suite of species, I guess, or generic species that we consider. So I think that we consider that the types of species that occur here are different from a bare ground situation. So just have more species there that would be exposed.
Might do one more question before we start wrapping up, and we can make an effort to get back to the other questions on the list. And I think this is probably a question that all industries would be interested in the answer to. There's obviously gaps in the data on species presence in crops across Australia and in other ag sectors. Is there a way that agriculture can work with the APVMA to generate this data and almost put a hold or an extension of time on a decision like this?
The decision itself won't be held up, because we will be going to assess what comes in through the submission.
Mm-hmm.
Once we've made the decision, there's nothing stopping people coming in with new data and looking for new assessments to expand the use patterns which remain, with regards to seeking new assessments based on new data. There are issues around who would hold the data, who would have access to the data, depending on who had actually collected the data. So if it was a holder, for example, only their products would end up with something on their label. It wouldn't go on all labels. And then they would have limits of use on that information for a period of time. At the moment, with a variation, it would be 5 years, I think, before any Me Too product could pick it up, the cheaper products. If it was data that was generated by somebody like the GRDC or somebody like that, they can choose how that data is distributed. Or if it's in the public domain, then everybody can use it.
Thanks, Gabe. That's really great insight. Thank you, everybody. I appreciate that being put on the spot with questions can sometimes put added pressure or head outside of the remit of what we agreed to go across tonight. But I think it was worth covering off on some of that purely to make sure that we were be inclusive of other sectors that have joined us tonight. Andrew, would you like to wrap everything up for us?
Yeah, look, thanks. Look, there's a heap of questions there in the in that chat, Rach. So yeah, we'll have to clearly get those answered and sent back to those people. And I think we've got the emails of everyone who is attending, so we should make that information available to everyone. And there is one there towards the end, Ken's put there. Look, we did ask the Minister and the regulatory team about maybe an extension of time, but I think given there's a 2-year potential phase out, even if we didn't get those things we're looking for, then obviously that'll form part of a reapplication, Ken. But yeah, it is something that we were certainly very conscious of in discussion with the Minister about timelines and things that have obviously come out of the Matthews review, which has led to a lot of these things. And it's not just Paraquat, Diquat, there's also other products that are, as you're all well aware, sitting in the pipeline as well that we've got to answer. So look, we think that these types of events tonight, we hope they're helpful. In my own local area, I've been helping growers already filling out submissions, which is awesome. And I really encourage everyone who is on tonight to have a go at filling one out, or encouraging somebody within the family to potentially pull something together for you just to participate and put your views forward, because that's what we need to do. This is a team game here in Australia, and we need to make sure our team is working to the best of abilities as we can and provide information that both Gai and Janine have put out tonight. And I really do appreciate both you, Gai and Janine, for joining us tonight and being so informative in terms of what you're looking for and helping people guide them through. To Peter, he was firstly brought into the GPA team to help us look at all of the chemical reviews that were coming up. And fortuitously, he was available to us when Colin unfortunately had his incident in America. And so it's been great to have Pete on board. And our chemicals team had already recognised this as a real issue for us. And I think Pete's given everybody great guidance there. And of course, bringing all that together, a lot of people have got my mobile. and probably Pete's as well. And we're always available to try and help people through this. And if there's something that we've missed tonight that you think should have been asked, then please feel free to put that through to us. I think we've got an email there, and people can also jump on and get this recording. But also an even bigger thank you to Rachel for pulling it all together in the team as well. And yeah, we reckon we've got a pretty good group working on behalf of GPA at the moment. And yeah, we're hopeful that Colin will be back somewhere towards the end of the year. But I think our team's just grown a lot bigger, and we're really excited about what's happening at the moment in terms of us being able to try and put farmers' interests right across Australia forward at every step. So thanks everyone for your participation tonight. We will answer all these questions, and they will come back to everyone that's been on the chat. And I think that's over and out. So thank you very much. Thank you all.
Thank you, everyone.